So, another video blog from me. This time I'm going to be talking about Silence of the Lambs. I've got quite a lot to say, so if I'm looking to either side, it's because I'm referring to things. In the last few days, I've rewatched on Blu-ray Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. Not seen either in quite some time, so I was looking forward to it, because I remember very much enjoying Silence of the Lambs and enjoying Hannibal as well, I guess, to some degree, although not in quite the same way. And I mean, it seems a bit odd, but I almost feel comparing the two films in any other, if there are any other two films, would be slightly pointless because they're so very different from each other. But as they both come from the same series of novels and they both feature the same main characters, they invite comparison more than is probably necessary and probably beneficial, at least to Hannibal. And obviously they're both supposedly set in the same world, so it all should follow through. Whether it does or not, you find out my opinions in a moment. The first thing that really strikes when looking at the two films next to each other is they're instantly, generically speaking, very different. Silence of the Lambs sits in a world which is sort of a psychological thriller with a murder mystery thrown in, while Hannibal, literally on the other hand here, seems to inhabit a sort of more straight ahead exploitation horror movie kind of thing, with hints of Grand Guignol kind of stuff, with all this Italian horror stuff going on, and occasional aspirations of being a psychological thriller that it never really quite gets to. This difference of genre obviously means there's a lot of differences within the films. However, the main thing that main feeling I came away with is that one is an excellently made movie, packed with threat, tension, and a genuinely disturbing kind of psychological element to it, and so generally disturbing psychological episodes of the film. And most importantly, the film's ultimate bad guy ends up being Hannibal Lecter rather than Buffalo Bill, who sort of feels a bit like a MacGuffin almost, albeit a very intense and scary in his own right one, while the other, being Hannibal, just really came away thinking it's a bit of a disappointment, and not a lot more than that. Anyway, as I was saying, in Silence, the serial killer, Buffalo Bill, is used as a MacGuffin. He is what brings Clarice and Hannibal Lecter together and makes film into more of a relationship piece about these two people and the psychology between them and the interaction between them. But it does manage to keep the murder mystery going in an interesting and exciting way as well, which is quite an achievement when you look at it like that, because it's almost two films running parallel with the same characters at once in Silence of the Lambs. But the version I watched recently is the recent, well, relatively recent anyway, Blu-ray edition. Previously I'd seen it on television, I'd seen it on video, and I'd seen it on DVD, but I'd never seen Silence of the Lambs sort of in the cinema. But seeing it on Blu-ray does kind of add what I think some of the stuff I might have missed previously in, and none of it's major huge things, but watching it in high definition like that really gave some extra little hints as to some elements of the characters, particularly things in the background in Hannibal Lecter's cell. The drawings on the wall are a lot clearer, things like that, and in Buffalo Bill's basement as well, it's much more obvious what his handiwork, I'll say for fear of spoilers for anyone who's not seen it, but what his handiwork entails, and a few little things about his character. I'm sure I must have spotted it before, but it never really stood out. The embroidered swastikas on the bedspread or the blanket or whatever it is in his sort of basement are quite fascinating, and yeah, none of this had been quite so clear in previous editions, but were here. So yeah, Blu-ray edition definitely worth checking out. Whereas Hannibal, let's go to that. When it comes to the relationships, the psychology, all of that just pretty much has nothing that Silence has. Plot-wise, it's sort of, I'm not sure what the word would be, it's taken out from the off, because Hannibal is the main character, essentially, and almost it seems like he's trying to be, or they're trying to make him appear to be a good guy, even though he's a psychopath and goes around killing people and eating people and all of this. He's not a good guy. He's not a friendly person, and trying to make him out as being one never quite feels right. And yeah, unfortunately, it relegates the character who'd previously been genuinely creepy and disturbing into a sort of caricature slasher style character, no more than, I mean, Jason, Michael Myers, things like that. He's a monster in a very basic kind of way, rather than a actually scary character, which he was in the first one. And while Anthony Hopkins seems to sort of revel in playing this up with some brilliantly delivered one-liners and stuff, it sort of just doesn't work for me. And I guess there's no real threatening antagonist, because Hannibal seems like this superhuman good guy, bad guy, psycho thing. And Gary Oldman's Mason Verger, who is the nearest the film has to having an antagonist, just doesn't work at all, and comes across being more a sort of parody thing, almost Dr. Evil-like in places, with things like the pigs, and with no genuine threat at all, which makes it a very unbalanced film, because the good guy is the bad guy. The bad guy just really isn't. I mean, Ray Liotta as well is a creepy, nasty bit of work, but at no point do I feel he's actually a threat to anyone or anything like that. When it comes to sort of filmic devices use, Silence of the Lambs is very naturalistic, much more so anyway, naturalistic, and it's only really the scenes in Lecter's dungeon and a few of the moments of extreme violence, the one when he's in the temporary cell in the courthouse really springs to mind, when he beats Charles Napier around the head, and that sort of uses some affectation, is possibly not the word, but yeah, some cinematic effect beyond here is what's happening in a naturalistic kind of way. And obviously the edit trick towards the end, which I'll try not to spoil, as the FBI are trying to find Buffalo Bill's house, is the other major point like that, where Hannibal goes all out with crazy editing, and particularly every time Hannibal does something violent, there's this weird slow motion jerky editing thing happens, and it sort of distances us from the violence that Hannibal's doing to try and make him seem to be the good guy, I can only assume, but really it just ends up making that pointless, because it makes us go, well, he's still clearly evil. He's disemboweled a guy and thrown him out a window, for God's sake. He's not a nice chap. I don't really want to be distanced from this, and am I meant to think he is actually not that bad? He's only killing the impolite people after all, kind of thing, and that just doesn't work. It's another character thing almost, but the filming just becomes frustrating, the editing of it, because you just go, well, why has it gone all jumpy? It didn't need to do that, I think, anyway. And so it leads to a bit of the problem with all of Hannibal, which is it doesn't feel like it's set in the real world. Silence of the Lambs feels very much this could be happening. This is a scary guy who's locked up. This is a serial killer who's based on various bits of other real-life serial killers, supposedly. And Hannibal just feels like it's set in a heightened horror cinema universe, which, you know, is great for some films, but unfortunately this is a follow-up to a film which is very grounded. It just doesn't work for me, which I've probably said way too many times, but it just loses any sense of tension, fear, threat, or anything like that in it. And the only real moment which is kind of actually, and it's not scary so much as it's just gross out really, is the dinner scene at the end, which again I won't go into too much detail, because if you've not seen it, don't want to spoil it. It's probably still worth having a look if you're interested in this sort of film. I mean, the other major difference is obviously the portrayal of Clarice Starling, because it's Jodie Foster in Silence and Julianne Moore in Hannibal. But that's probably the bit which is, well, it would have been interesting to see Jodie Foster's take on the older, more experienced Clarice. Julianne Moore does bring a certain strength to it, which I'm not sure Jodie Foster would, which is necessary at this point, because she's that bit older, that bit stronger, that bit more worldly wise. And and really it works fine, is probably about all I can say for it. It's not bad, it's not that great. I mean, Jodie Foster's amazing in Silence of the Lambs. Julianne Moore is fine in Hannibal. She plays the part, she plays it well. Nothing wrong with that, really, and that's about the best thing that can be said for Hannibal, is an unremarkable lead performance, well, lead-ish performance there. So I guess in the end, I'd say Silence of the Lambs is an astoundingly tense psychological thriller with a splash of horror that I think anyone should see, really, whether you're a big film buff or not. Whereas Hannibal is disappointing, and it's interesting, and it does well with the source material. I've read the book, and it's very similar, but coming as a follow-up to the film of Silence of the Lambs doesn't work at all, and doesn't seem to even know what it's trying to be. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that. I might have to check out Manhunter and Red Dragon now and compare those, because I enjoyed both of those, but again in very, very different ways.